So Simple Proof is a Guatemalan tech startup that was started last year by two local co-founders. I recently joined the team as elections lead. I personally have been involved in elections auditing in Guatemala. I was born and raised here, and this came about as a result of being an activist in the election system locally and realizing in 2019 when we had our previous election to our most recent one that there was some really odd behavior happening with the internet and the public facing database of the election authority, where essentially there was files that were changed and being altered. And this in 2019 caused for the first time credible election fraud accusations from the right, the left, the up, the down. I mean, everyone in 2019 was very dissatisfied with the fact that they just couldn't trust what was being published to the internet. And at the time, I did a lot of work and basically recommended to the authorities that they used a secure system to protect their data. And that recommendation led these guys at Simple Proof to start the company and eventually offer the service that the election authority used, where I'll emphasize, this is purely Bitcoin. There's no tokens or other stuff. This is like just raw Bitcoin being used to protect the voting system in Guatemala, and it's just been a wild ride.
Welcome to the Bitcoin Source, your number one podcast for diverse Bitcoin knowledge. I'm Daru, your host for today's thought provoking session. We're thrilled to have with us Carlos Toriello as the CFO of Simple Proof, a startup that helped Guatemala become the first country in the world to protect its voting system with Bitcoin. So, whether you're a seasoned Bitcoiner or just curious, there's something in this episode for everyone. Let's get started. Welcome, Carlos.
Thanks, man. Good to be here.
Yeah, so Carlos, this is your first time here, so we'll start things off so my audience can kind of know what you've been building in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So, can you explain the mission of Simple Proof and how you became to use Bitcoin technology to enhance the electoral transparency in Guatemala?
Sure. So Simple Proof is a Guatemalan tech startup that was started last year by two local co-founders. I recently joined the team as elections lead. I personally have been involved in elections auditing in Guatemala. I was born and raised here, and this came about as a result of being an activist in the election system locally and realizing in 2019 when we had our previous election to our most recent one that there was some really odd behavior happening with the internet and the public facing database of the election authority, where essentially there was files that were changed and being altered. And this in 2019 caused for the first time credible election fraud accusations from the right, the left, the up, the down. I mean, everyone in 2019 was very dissatisfied with the fact that they just couldn't trust what was being published to the internet. And at the time, I did a lot of work and basically recommended to the authorities that they used a secure system to protect their data. And that recommendation led these guys at Simple Proof to start the company and eventually offer the service that the election authority used, where I'll emphasize, this is purely Bitcoin. There's no tokens or other stuff. This is like just raw Bitcoin being used to protect the voting system in Guatemala, and it's just been a wild ride.
Yes, this is awesome because when I was listening to you speak, Carlos, of course, I don't know how familiar you are with the American political landscape, but it's a complete madhouse, of course. And I remember during Trump's first presidency, when he was leaving and Joe Biden was coming in, there was all this like conversation around voter fraud and people kind of like spoofing the electoral votes, different things. And Trump, because I think his son or someone in his family, I think it was Jared Kushner, he's very close with the Ripple team and XRP, and not even to get into the altcoins, but just they had this formulation of we're going to use blockchain to verify the voting system. we're going to use proof of work to verify the voting system. I remember hearing conversations about that, but it kind of like disappeared. And when I read your story, I was like, oh, this guy is actually doing what a lot of Americans wish they had in the voting system in Guatemala. So when I heard that, I had to have this conversation with you. And I'm just super excited to hear more about Simple Proof and how to utilize Bitcoin and something like open timestamps to secure election results.
For sure. And so, simple proof exists to uphold information integrity. And so, our first client, our first use case was the National Elections Authorities of Guatemala. But the cool thing about what we've built is that it actually goes way beyond elections and just digital information in general. We hope to, our mission, our grand vision is that we hope to make it standard operating procedure for all public records issued by all governments worldwide to get everything timestamped to Bitcoin. In the post-truth world that we live in, where AI makes it trivially easy and cheap to make fake information, Bitcoin is our best and basically only tool that can save us from this, so that we can have common ground on which to stand, of just saying this is reality, right? We're gonna use common understood documents or just truth from which to then build upon, right? And so we're just very excited to have proven it at a national scale in Guatemala. And for those that don't know, Guatemala is right next door to Mexico. So, the next country over after Mexico. There are over 18 million people living in our country, 9.2 million registered voters, and we deployed it as part of the national system. So this isn't a small election. In the US, for example, there are thousands of election jurisdictions and authorities, and I think very, very few of them have millions of voters. Most, it's hundreds of thousands. So the fact that Guatemala has 9.2 million registered voters means that we've proven this at a scale that could work for essentially anywhere in the United States. And our hope is that we can find Bitcoiners that want to work with us to take this solution that's been proven in Guatemala and use it in November in the USA.
100%. And I know that you mentioned that there's 18 million and about 9 million vote. So my question to you now, Carlos, is I know in the American system, a lot of people can't vote because they're incarcerated or they just are not following politics. Is that the case in Guatemala? Does Guatemala allow, convicted felons to actually cast a vote and change the narrative in their?
I don't believe so. I don't think folks in that are have their liberties restrained by the state have the ability to vote. Our servicemen, I think, do, and police do, which is, I think, a little different. But to be honest, it's and another thing to emphasize is the way our voting system works here in Guatemala is that you're assigned to a voting table based on your residency, and you show up, you present your ID, it's confirmed that you are assigned to that voting table. Once you vote, at the end of the voting day, the count happens in front of witnesses. So we have literally hundreds of thousands of people spread out across the country visually confirming all of the votes are counted as cast. It's only paper ballots. But where we came in is that those individual votes are tallied into a summary document. I think in the States they're called like poll tapes or canvases. It's like where you go to vote, there's a total at that location. And so say your voting center issues the total of votes in that location. That's the document that we timestamp to Bitcoin. So it's not that we have this solution for voting, it's we have a solution to protect the integrity of the information that's being communicated to the public so that anyone can verify that no funny stuff happened, right? And so just to emphasize that it's not necessarily a voting solution, but really more of a digital information integrity, where in the case of elections, it's, you said the US is a madhouse right now, but really the entire world is going crazy, right? So we're just trying to provide an anchor of truth in a sea of lies.
Thank you, Carlos. I had the privilege to go to El Salvador in November of 2023. So I got to immerse myself in the culture. I got to see what it was like to be in a place that was Bitcoin only. Bukele is doing an awesome job there. And I wanted to ask you, Carlos, like, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced while implementing this technology in Guatemala's electoral system?
Sure. So we didn't really mention Bitcoin because it's Bitcoin is something that we're excited about. It's allows us to build on a solid foundation. We know our technology is the best for this because we're building on Bitcoin, right? You don't have to trust what we do. You just have to understand mathematics and cryptography, and then you can run the numbers yourself, right? Whereas other people in this space, they always kind of, oh yeah, my database complies with all these certifications and this or that. When we came in, it was like, look, we are providing this technology solution. It's innovative, and what it relies on is a network that has more uptime than any other distributed network in the world, that absolutely no one controls, that empowers people to verify for themselves. And so it wasn't necessary to mention Bitcoin, and Guatemala, even though it's next door to El Salvador, most people here don't understand Bitcoin, don't know Bitcoin. They know Bukele, but the Bitcoin thing is actually kind of like he made a mistake there, and you're just like, you haven't really looked into it. But so we we focus purely on the fact that this is just the best solution possible from a technical perspective of protecting yourself from potential artificial intelligence attacks, from Russian, Korean hackers. I mean, if what we provide is a backup plan and insurance policy in case something goes wrong. And usually in elections, things go wrong. So one out of one time that we've been able to sell this to an election authority, it's been used by those same authorities to make the case publicly that no election fraud happened. And so in the to your question, it was it's been a long road to get here, because we've done a lot of work educating a lot of people on the value of just having good information and good systems. But it's not necessarily a Bitcoin thing. It's just what's the best way to protect our system. And we were lucky enough to actually prove it at scale, which is exciting because now people that wouldn't otherwise have taken a second look at Bitcoin are like, huh, so you use Bitcoin to do that? It's like, how does, and so we're excited because it provides this different kind of touch point for people that haven't fallen down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin, right? It's now there's the president, his executive staff, people in Congress, judges. I mean, the entire government apparatus knows that something serious happened and that Bitcoin played a role to defend our ability to have a peaceful transition of power.
Hey, it's Daru from the Bitcoin Source, and if you're a podcaster like me, you know how important it is to have a website that represents your show professionally. That's why I want to introduce you to Podpage, the absolute best website builder made specifically for podcasters. What I love about Podpage is just how easy it is. No headaches, no coding. You just plug in your podcast feed and it builds a stunning professional website just for you, complete with all your episodes and reviews and even contact forms for users to sign up on. Now I have to keep it real. We are all busy in this crazy tech-based heavy world. Other platforms make you do all the heavy lifting, but Podpage updates your website every time you post a new episode. Plus it integrates Apple, Google, and Spotify reviews so your audience can see your latest ratings right on the website. If you're serious about having a podcast, this should be a non-negotiable, and Podpage makes that effortless. So if you're ready to level up your podcast, easy to build, beautifully designed website, I highly recommend Podpage. Give it a try. You won't be disappointed. Now back to the episode.
So it just opens up the conversation to talk to someone about Bitcoin from a completely different angle, which is just what is truth? How do we agree on anything? And Bitcoin can be an extremely powerful tool for that.
Yeah, I have to agree with that 100%, Carlos. And I want to talk about something that I know is very close to your heart, your documentary, Immutable Democracy. It covers a lot of this incredible journey that you've been doing down in Guatemala. Can you share a particular impactful story or revelation that emerged during its production?
Sure. So yeah, Immutable Democracy. It's on YouTube for free. It's 15 minutes. It chronicles the kind of first chapter of this ongoing saga. Right. We hope to be able to produce following chapters for this documentary, particularly chronicling how Bitcoiners helped us take this to the US. Right. So if you're listening to this, reach out. Simpleproof.com. We want to work with you to bring this to your location. There's no reason not to do it. And so, you know, what did I learn, or like what did I take out of it is there's this isn't this is a very unique story even within Bitcoin, which is already unique. And we're just very excited to be a part of it and share it, because we're proud to have done this for Guatemala. We love our voting system. We wanted to protect it. And we think that telling the story of how Bitcoiners, instead of just staying on the sidelines and watching clown world kind of take over and everything just going to crap and saying, oh, well, I don't care because I have Bitcoin. It's like, probably going to care if all your neighbors are going crazy. And so it's just a call to action to Bitcoiners everywhere to say, don't do this for democracy. It is very powerful to imagine that we can create immutable democracies where the will of the people is respected and is conserved and is transferred. But more than that, it's about Bitcoin, right? It's about saying, I'm not asking you to believe in democracy. I don't think you should. That's up to you. But it's understanding that what we tell in this story is the fact that democracy matters to a lot of people, and they have a lot of strong opinions about it. And so if Bitcoin they see it as a tool to protect this, which is so valuable to them, it just creates this touch point that now all the FUD that they've been getting, to like push them away from it, they have to reconcile that, and they realize, wow, if Bitcoin protected this thing that I care so much about, what else is going on, right? So we knew something big was going to happen, and we're just very excited to have been able to share it in that documentary, and we hope folks enjoy it.
Yes, and in the Bitcoin ecosystem, perception is everything, right? And the public and the people that believe in Bitcoin, I believe, are like two separate worlds. And were there any notable changes you saw, Carlos, on your end in the perception of people in Guatemala responding to this Bitcoin technology? And did that change the way that they looked at the integrity of the electoral technology that they have outside Guatemala?
For sure. It was incredibly exciting to see traditional media outlets reporting on what happened, because to give people context in terms of what happened with the election in Guatemala, it's the way I summarize it is Guatemala's had essentially the same owners for about 80 years, and ever so often they changed the management, right? So we've had democracy for about 40 years, and then 40 years prior to that, kind of a military dictatorship. And the ownership structure has always essentially been the same, and they changed the manager, right? 2023 and the election in Guatemala last year is the first time in 80 years that a new manager has been put in power that responds to, let's say, a different owner. And so that shook up our system, very to its core. And the outgoing regime, as a defensive strategy, immediately went to argue that there was election fraud, and they weaponized the justice system. They basically corrupted the evidence, because since it's all paper-based, they sent cops into the election system and removed all of the paper documentation that supports the voting system. But that's contravening the same custody of the evidence. And so the cops themselves destroyed the evidence when they intervened the custody. And so now no one knows what to trust in terms of the paper record, but everything was scanned, and all of those scans were hashed and timestamped to Bitcoin. So the only thing that people can now trust in terms of what they could believe of the outcome is what's on Bitcoin. And so a lot of people that otherwise, just traditional media, people from all walks of life are like, wow, but they're accusing the election authorities of committing election fraud. However, it's on Bitcoin, so it can't be altered. So it's like there's like they're asking more questions. They're requiring better evidence than just like, oh, I lost, and so there was fraud. It's like, well, no, there's this other thing, and so it's still it's the kind of thing that's so big that it's still making its way through the society. But that's what I mean, that now when I talk to anyone in government, particularly high up in terms of the president, who was used this to ensure that he was in power. Now you talk to folks about Bitcoin and they have to reconcile the fact that it played this huge role in something that was near and dear to their hearts. And so that's just makes it a lot easier to explain to people that Bitcoin is the most powerful tool for humanity, and we all need to study it. The more we study it, the better, because the impossible sort of becomes possible when you study Bitcoin.
Yes, and this is, not to pontificate, but this is why what you're doing is so genius because, we this is an election year for the US, right? In November, people will go out and vote. There'll be a new president coming in, and I'm sure the topic is going to be voter fraud. I'm sure that there's going to be corporations and companies, and of course, Bitcoin is now a political conversation on the docket, right? All these politicians are starting to talk about Bitcoin. And I know that you're looking to bring simple proof solutions to the USA for upcoming elections. What are the specific needs and challenges you anticipate in adapting this technology to the American electoral system?
So that's the beautiful thing of how we built it, because it's a digital information, it's essentially a record keeping solution. It's a backup plan. It's insurance policy for any election authority anywhere to say, hey, if the shit hits the fan, what's your plan? Right? And anyone with half a brain knows that the shit will hit the fan in November. And this is just a great way, and it's cheap because, I mean, if Guatemala can afford it, why would the US not be able to afford it? And there's no way a poor country like this isn't an extraordinarily expensive solution. And so what I'll say is, in the case of Guatemala, we have one election authority for our entire system, which is 9.2 million registered voters. I think the US has something like 200 million registered voters, give or take. So it's bigger. However, the election is carried out by local election authorities. So
Yep.
wherever you live, odds are the local county clerk is the election authority responsible for organizing the election in your jurisdiction. So we don't need to convince, some fancy federal agency over in Washington that's never going to do this because, Ripple or whoever have already, put their claws in. It's your neighbor might be the county clerk, and he might not know about technology and cryptography, but you can just go over, knock on the county clerk's door and ask, hey, here's an interesting case study from Guatemala. You should look into this because, what is your plan in November if everything goes wrong? And in the case of Guatemala, the election authority signed the contract with us 4 days prior to implementing this, and we still succeeded. So it's built to be simple. I mean, that's literally why it's simple proof, right? This doesn't require crazy changes to existing infrastructure. No. This is built to just run on top of your existing infrastructure, whatever that may be. If you create any digital files, we could just, all we're doing is creating a backup, hashing everything to Bitcoin, keeping very accurate records, so that after the fact, if anyone wants to accuse the system of wrongdoing, you can actually look at an independent record that is on everyone's database. Anyone who runs a node in Bitcoin will have this record. And so it's not a matter of trusting that the election authorities did a good job, but it's empowering to send a strong signal of, we are ready and we stand by the work that we do. And if you want, you can come in and check it for yourself. You don't need to trust us. You've been empowered with open source tools to do the work yourself.
Yes, and there's a lot of people out there that will use what you just said and say, they'll kind of counteract that with some fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And how do you address those critics, right? How do you address the people that may be skeptical or outright opposed to integrating Bitcoin? They might just like the way the current voting system is. Like, how do you address that?
Well, it's, if you are concerned about your voting system and you are defensive about it, and you want to, keep it as safe as possible, like, more power to you, and you should. The more citizens, local citizens especially, involved and working to protect their local elections, the better. This is just an option that allows you to back up all of your digital systems. And if anyone asks and accuses you of wrongdoing, you can say, you don't need to trust me. You just, like, here's the record, check it for yourself. And if I'm lying, then you'll be able to prove it. So this isn't changing how you vote. This isn't asking, special access to anything and manipulating, none of that. It's, what do you already have? What's your plan to have a backup? And most elections are so important that there should be a backup to the backup to the backup. I mean, redundancy is key if you might get attacked from like all angles. Local people, there are local political forces and definitely external, like outside the US forces that would like to hack the election. And so arguing against another backup that also relies on open source protocols that just provides empowers citizens to check for themselves what the data was and how it happened. I mean, there's really no argument. The best argument to not do this is if you plan to steal your local election. If you're an election authority that plans on committing election fraud, don't do this. If you're an election authority that wants to send a strong signal to your local, citizens that you mean business, you're taking your digital security seriously, you're conscious of the cybersecurity threats, and you want to send a strong signal, this is like the strongest signal you can send. And as a Bitcoiner, if you're the one that tells your local election authority, it's probably some well-meaning boomer or Gen Xer that has doesn't really understand technology. They're doing this for love of country, and that's fantastic. And so just telling them that there's a tool that exists that can help them if the shit hits the fan is the kind of thing that will make you a very valuable neighbor to your local community, and they won't forget what you did. Plus, if you're the one that helps us get Bitcoin to protect the voting system in the US, then you become the Bitcoiner who did that, right? And that's, I think, an enormous contribution to the Bitcoin network of saying, I was the Bitcoiner that got Bitcoin to protect the voting system in probably the most contested election in the history of the US, right? So I think that gets you kind of automatic legend status amongst the Bitcoin community.
Yes, agreed. Well said. Well said. Looking forward, how do you see Bitcoin continuing to play a role in this purported democracy, right? So we're seeing the world changing. The world is a complete madhouse from all political spectrums. And like, what is your ultimate vision for Simple Proof? Like in the next 3 or 4 years, like what is your vision on where it's gonna go?
Yeah. So our vision is that we want to make it standard operating procedure for every single public record ever produced by any government everywhere worldwide to be timestamped to Bitcoin. There is a significant risk that with AI and just how reality seems to change nowadays so quickly, that if you're ever in a bind and on the other side of you've pissed off essentially someone in government, they could just change the records and change tamper evidence to make it seem like you did something that you never did. And so we want to make it so that the government will always issue public records. Like I don't see a world where the government would no longer have the ability to issue public records, like the voting totals, like your property deed, like your tax receipts. Like I don't see a world where we remove the government from doing that. What we do want is to remove the government and anyone's ability to change the public record once it's issued, right? It's you, yes, sure, the government and the folks, the bureaucrats inside the government are the ones that have to essentially issue the voting totals, your tax receipt, your license for driving. I mean, whatever the record may be. But once it's issued, they do not and they should never have the ability to change that after the fact. And the sad reality is that right now, like, what's keeping anyone from, with the right resources, from changing the public record? Like, there's really just we're trusting their databases, and Bitcoin allows us to change that. And it's recently Julian Assange's a presentation that he did in 2014 came out with which I highly recommend every Bitcoiner watch, from 2014, where he talks about one of the reasons he's excited about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin eliminates or breaks Orwell's dictum. And what Orwell's dictum says is, for those that don't know Orwell in 1984, is that he who controls the present controls the past, and he who controls the past controls the future. So Bitcoin really is our chance to say that's no longer true. For the entirety of human history, the winners get to write history. And when you get to write history, obviously you're the good guy, and the baddies are all everyone else. Whereas now it's if we do this right, we can make it so that history cannot be rewritten, right? And I think that is essentially leveling the playing field between individuals and the government, right? And we're just very excited to do that, and please reach out to us if we're building a system to empower folks to do that. And literally, like, we've done it in Guatemala, we did it, but the US is, I mean, it's your place, right? So it's like, if you're in your local community, you don't know how to contribute to the Bitcoin network, we're asking you, like, help us bring this to the right people. All we want is a conversation with election authorities in your local county to tell them, look, this we literally won't change anything. It's cheap. We already did it at scale. Like, there's no problem here.
Exactly. Don't trust, verify. And I think
Yes.
that, this episode and people watching this will hopefully expand the knowledge that you're kind of giving forth to the world. And, what advice would you give other technologists or entrepreneurs who want to use blockchain or Bitcoin technology to solve some of society's challenges?
Sure. So study Bitcoin. Uh, it's number one is the Bitcoin toolbox and rabbit hole is deep. We, you know, and don't forget your neighbor, and like, get involved in your local community, because it's like, sure, El Salvador looks great, but there are problems there as well, right? So it's like, if Bitcoiners everywhere just get more involved in their community to try to stop the slow creep of madness that's just destroying communities everywhere, and just get involved and realize, wow, there's this problem that I don't know how to solve. There's something that Bitcoin can do for you. And that's, for me, it was just, I was very passionate about our voting system. I got really into the weeds and realized, wow, there's this huge problem of how do we trust the data that the voting system produces? And that's how I ended up stumbling upon open timestamps, which is, I highly encourage anyone to go and visit opentimestamps.org. It's the protocol that we use on top of Bitcoin, and it's a way to be extremely efficient use of the blockchain as a database. We are not using Bitcoin to create JPEGs, and it's not that. It's actually the polar opposite of that. We are just using the Bitcoin time chain as kind of Satoshi envisions. And with recent emails that came out of from the Craig Wright case, you can see that Satoshi thought, hey, beyond money, like, the only thing that Bitcoin could really be useful for is a time chain of just like a timestamp of this happened at a certain moment in time. And that is what open timestamps is. And the tool is basically free. It's there and very easy for any individual to use. What we did was just turn it on, into overdrive and build a massive, like, government scale version of this so that it can grow to swallow up basically all government records everywhere. But if you're a Bitcoiner and you have any sensitive data that you need to make sure that no one can ever say you didn't have, like, or you're an artist and you create something that's yours, you can just use opentimestamps.org and Bitcoin to prove that you have that information and as of that moment in time, and that gives you kind of proof of when you had this. And so just in general, I was super surprised at the power of Bitcoin, and just continue to get surprised and just try to come up with new solutions that at the end of the day solve real problems for people. It's like there's the famous saying that says Bitcoin fixes this. I disagree. I push back on that. I think Bitcoiners who study Bitcoin and understand how to use Bitcoin to solve problems is what fixes this. So I invite you all to study more and just go down the rabbit hole, because you'll be surprised.
Yes, this is why this is world-changing stuff, Carlos. And lastly, what has this journey with Simple Proof and the broader Bitcoin ecosystem taught you personally about the intersection of technology and democracy?
So the most unique thing that kind of blew me away was voting systems. Democracy, is a loaded term, but voting, right? Voting is something that happens in democracies. Happens basically any time a group of people show up, right? And so voting is essentially a consensus algorithm, right? And for those that don't know, it's like Bitcoin is a proof of work consensus algorithm. And so I realized, wow, voting systems are consensus algorithms. And in the case of Guatemala, because of how our voting system is structured, and this is what we try to, explain in our documentary, is that the fact that we mobilize so many people and it's all paper-based, it's a proof of work consensus algorithm that is paper-based. And so I discovered all of these parallels between our voting system and Bitcoin. And so my passion for working with elections and Bitcoin is that I think one of the best ways to reach new audiences of Bitcoiners, because Bitcoiners come mainly for the money, right? It's like or for and then stay for the revolution. But it's like the fiat world in some way, shape, or form affected you, and you've discovered Bitcoin and realized that Bitcoin is basically the best tool we've ever had to protect ourselves. But I think that that's not going to be the same for a lot of human beings. But in democracies, there's all these people that participate and care a lot about this. So if we are able to use Bitcoin to, fix or just dramatically improve, right? Improve the security, because this is not a panacea. This doesn't eliminate all a possibility of fraud. It's like, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Using Bitcoin in this way makes it a lot harder for attackers to get away with fraud. So I'm not saying it's impossible. We're just, how can you argue against making the bad guys have to work harder, right? Like it's not a bad argument. It's an easy argument to make. And so if we succeed at dramatically improving voting systems for democracies the world over, that's going to allow us to make that an educational leap for many people of saying, hey, your voting system, you trust it, it's a consensus algorithm, it works this way. Well, take a look at this other consensus algorithm. And by the way, it's completely auditable, and it does the entire system for the entire world every 10 minutes, right? And so it just blows your mind to realize, wow, Guatemala, for example, we vote every 4 years, right? The US has constant elections, but say the presidential cycle is 4 years. You're like, oh, every 4 years we vote. It's like Bitcoin produces blocks every 10 minutes. Right. And so it's like that's understanding how difficult it is for people to come to agreement on something like an election. And Bitcoin does it for the entire monetary network that could power the entire world every 10 minutes. That's how profound this is. And I'm just hopeful that we bring in a lot of new people that came for democracy but stayed for Bitcoin.
Yes, and I learned so much just listening to you talk, Carlos. Like, this is an eye opener for me. I've always understood and appreciated the power of Bitcoin, but to really see what Simple Proof is doing and to see how this is going to impact or possibly impact elections in the future going forward is just, it's an incredible endeavor. It's an incredible position to be in this time and space right now, to have access to this technology and to have entrepreneurs such as yourself that are pushing the limits and pushing the capabilities of what Bitcoin can do.
It's if we all do our part, then we will certainly win.
For sure. So thank you, Carlos, for sharing your experiences with us today. To our audience, if you found this conversation as fascinating as I did, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the Bitcoin Source, a Bitcoin conversation. Also, hitting the notification bell ensures that you won't miss out on any of our future conversations with leading minds in the space such as Carlos here. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you back on our next conversation.
Gracias.